Okay, so we're actually going to go a little bit out of order. I don't think it matters to y'all being virtual. You don't have, you're not writing it in order in class. I'm going to have to tell them to skip ahead. Only reason, just because I felt like doing the height assignment today, because it's kind of easier, nicer way to start off a Monday. So we're going to talk about how to determine race just a little bit, and then get into height, and that's what you're practicing over is height. You will practice how to determine race with another assignment later in the week as well. All right, so most reliable part of the skeleton in helping determine ancestry is the skull, especially the facial region. So most often the ancestry of a skeletal remains is divided into one of three categories: European descent, African descent, Asian or Native American descent. That's really the only three categories. So obviously if a person is mixed, is in like two categories, it's gonna be a lot harder to identify them. If they're out of these three categories, then again, a little harder. So these are the three main categories. Is really all we can break it down with by race is just narrowing them into those categories. Again, the purpose of this in anthropology is they're trying to figure out who this person is. If we don't have anything to go on, like if there's no flesh on them at all, there we go. If there's no flesh on them at all, the point of this first is just to figure out who this person is. Obviously, I can't start solving a case if I don't even know who the dead person is. If I don't even know who I'm looking for, I obviously can't find suspects if I don't even know who this person is. So the main purpose of an anthropology is just identity first. So they're going to start putting them into categories. Like, are they a male or a female? Are they what height? Are they what race? Are they? So they're just trying to put them into categories so they can look at the missing persons and see if they find someone that fits. All right, so ancestry, European. Let me show you a picture of this in a second so you can kind of visualize it better. But their nasal aperture is long and narrow with a high bridge and a sharp nasal sill. I mean, that's a little part that sticks out right here under your skull. It's much pointier in European ancestry. It has a little sharp, it's kind of actually like a point. And then the actual hole, what they call that, the aperture, the nasal aperture, the hole where our nose is. Because this is not bone, this is cartilage. So when you see your skull, it's just like a hole where our cartilage would sit on top of it, is longer and more narrow. Lower edge of the nasal aperture projects sharply outward. So this little sill sticks out further. The nasal aperture is short and wide for an African. So if we look at the comparison for African descent, usually the nasal aperture, so again, the overall hole, is shorter and wider. With a low bridge and a guttered nasal sill. So just the sill part, the little bone that I told you was kind of pointy in European ancestry is not pointy. It's basically almost flat, sometimes not even there. Nasal aperture is medium size for Asian or Native American. So kind of in between the longer pointy one and basically flat or non-existent in between. So there should be more medium-sized bridge and nasal and more medium-sized hole. So not long and narrow, not short and wide, just kind of in between. And then for teeth shape, okay, so we're back to European. Teeth have flat profile, blade form incisors. So we have sharper incisors teeth for European descent. And teeth have a flat profile. That I'll show you pictures. It's hard to visualize, but it's like the way they look inside, they're flatter. Now for African descent, teeth have a flat profile as well, and blade form incisors, so that's the same. But when we get into Asian and Native American, the inner surface of the teeth are scooped. So instead of it being flat back here, it actually has like a scoop. Again, the pictures will make it a lot more clear. And incisors are shovel-shaped. So your incisor, instead of it looking more like a canine over here, if you don't know what an incisor is, it's your pointy tooth off to the side. Their incisors are more shovel-shaped. So it just means, again, they have a scoop. For their orbits, so that's your eye sockets. Okay, so European descent eye sockets, oval, down slanted, angular orbit shape. So that just means they're more oval. Okay, so that may not be what you would think, but they're more oval in shaped, down slanted, so usually more turned down, and can be a little more angular, can be a little more square, depending, but usually more oval and a little bit turned down. For African descent, the actual sockets, the hole would be more square-like. So square-like, longer rectangular orbit shapes. And then for Asian Native American, they tend to be very round. very, very round orbit shape. So European, longer, more oval, so rounded but longer. African is more square, so has more squared off edges. And then Asian is very round. So let's look at some pictures so you can kind of see it, okay? So here, I always feel like the male is a little better to look at. I even think they're more characteristic, but here's the difference between a female and a male. And I'm going to talk about this more later in the week. I can see some differences here that you may not be seeing yet between a female and a male skull, but there are some differences, and we'll talk. I don't want to point those out yet, so we'll wait for a little bit on that. But let's look at the race characteristics. So for European, see this right here? See how it's like much pointier? So let's just look at the nose. Nose is really easy. It's like the easiest part to look at. So we got this part. Here is Asian, and here is African. So this actual hole, a little longer, a little more narrow, but really it's just this part right here. It sticks out, okay? So it's more pointy. It's actually like coming off of the skull, and that's that sill that's sticking out. Same thing for the Asian, it's sticking out a little, but you can see not as much. It's definitely not as distinctive there. But then when I look at African, definitely more wide, definitely shorter, so shorter in height, wider in height, and not sticking out, not having that stick out sill. If we look for the same one in the female version, this one has a much longer, so longer, more narrow hole. Asian, a little bit. So again, that's supposed to be medium length, so not as long, but not as short as the African, not as wide as the African, but not as narrow as the European. So basically their noses are in between. Now for the eye shapes, very interesting. Okay, so ours, European, I say ours, I mean mine. Y'all might be African or Asian, I'm not sure if I have any Asian students. Some of y'all haven't seen because you're virtual, but you're looking at your eye shapes. So mine should look like this without my face because I have a European ancestry, so more oval shaped. Asian are supposed to be more rounded. That to me does not look super round. I would say this one covers that a little better because again, it's not perfect. It's hard to tell, okay? A lot of us are mixed. A lot of us, just because I'm white and you're white doesn't mean our skulls look the same, okay? We have differences in our face. That's why our faces look different. But on average, more oval shaped, more rounded shape, more squared off shape. I see it, but it is like, some people are not as distinctive as others. Like this skull looks really distinctive for African, really fits the nose profile, really has those squared off edges. But then when I see this one, it doesn't fit it quite as good. I do see those square edges, but it's not as like dead set on as this picture. Same thing for here. This one looks a lot more rounded eye sockets, but this one doesn't. The noses fit though. This, I'm seeing that like downturned. See how that goes further down? And theirs goes a little further down, so it's a downturned and a little more rounded. So to me, the easiest place to look for looking at race is the nose. That's probably the easiest. Now, last little part about their teeth. So the shape of the incisors is the most important indicator of race. So this, but again, this does not tell me the difference between African and European descent because they're the same. So African and European both look like this. So this is what teeth look like. Basically, it's called a flat profile. It looks fairly flat on the insides. We're looking at the inside of the teeth. Asian Native American, though, you can see how it's like there's a little divot. There's little divots in their teeth. And divots a tiny bit over here, but definitely more so for Asian Native American. Now, does that mean every single Asian has more divoted feet? No. Okay. It's like on average, though, is that their teeth have this scooped out appearance, whereas African and European, not so much. So the incisors are shovel-shaped, the inner surface of the scooped or curved. Okay, so determining ancestry, there are also distinctive orbit shapes. So we've already talked about the orbit shapes, just this one makes it more clear. So European, see how it's just so much deeper down at the bottom. So that over down turn. So it's like down here and then rounded. More wide, not down turn. So it's not going down their face, more rectangular, more square, and Asian is supposed to be more round. Okay, so facial reconstruction. So when identifying remains cannot be connected to a person, a facial reconstruction can be done through tissue thickness and facial muscles. The most important thing with a facial reconstruction is the positioning of the facial features in relation to one another. So facial reconstruction specialists will use data about tissue depth. So just like what are the average thicknesses in these parts of our faces based on what race we think they are. And we'll glue little markers on the skull to that thickness. So we'll glue those down and then put clay on top of that thickness and start forming the face. So studies have shown that the brain will pick up on similarities of the known and unknown face when it is seen alone and not compared. Process is not 100% accurate, but it's been proven to be very successful. So they, make a pretty good recommendation. They post that picture. They show the model, and someone might recognize it if they post pictures of them, like on the news and things. All right, now determining height. This is what you're actually going to work on today. It's pretty simple. It's just a quick little math formula. So height can be estimated by examining one of the long bones. So any of our bones in our body that are long, you can use for height determination. Sorry. So men and women have different proportions of long bones to total height. So there are different formulas for each. So you do have to, if you think it's a man's skeleton, you're going to use the man formulas. If you think it's a woman's skeleton, you use the woman formulas. So the formulas are generally accurate within a range of about 7.5 centimeters up or down. So that's about 10. So yeah, so not much different. So up or down that much. Okay, so if you think it's a male skeleton, then you have the femur length. Now, where's our femur? Okay, so these are when you actually do have to know what bone you have. So the femur is the big leg bone. Okay, so that's my big leg bone connecting my hip to my knee. So if you have the femur, you measure it. Okay, so I'm going to measure the femur bone. I'm going to multiply that, what I just measured, by 2.23, and I'm going to add 69.08. Now, these are all in centimeters. Okay. Now, the tibia. Okay, so where's our tibia? That's in our calf. I was just like, whoa, I just blanked on where it's at. It's in your calf. Okay, so if I have my tibia bone, I could do my tibia or my fibia, but this chart's only showing you the tibia. So the tibia is in below the knee. Okay, so below my knee to my ankle is my tibia. And I take my tibia length that I measure, I multiply by 2.39, and I add on 81.68. And my humerus, that's this big bone. Okay, so bicep bone. Not really, but it's under there. Okay, so you measure their humerus and you multiply by 2.97 plus 73.57. And then if you have the radius is one down here. There's ones for ulna as well. So you have your ulna over here and your radius over here. And you take that, and this is in the way. Uh-oh. I will move that later, but the formula is on the paper, so don't worry about it. And then female, you can just notice that what you multiply it by and what you add to it are a little bit less. In general, most women do not have as long bones. So we tend to be shorter in general, but also just our overall long bones aren't as long. And there you go. So when you get to your assignment today, basically you're going to be given either a femur or a tibia or a humerus, like you'll be given that, and you'll just look at the chart, do the math, and estimate how tall that person is. Pretty simple. Okay. Done with notes for today. I'm in the way.